right. You are the strength, you have the power, Jesus the right. You are the strength, you have the power, Jesus the right. You are the strength, and you have the power, Jesus the right. You are my right. You are my right. Amen. Better than the riches of this world, better than the sound of my friends' voices, better than the biggest dreams in my heart. That's just the start. Better than getting what I say I need, better than living the life that I want to, better than the love anyone could give. Your love is, you hold me now in your arms and never let me go. You are Lord of sunshine, moonlight, and the night sky. Give me breath and all your love, give my heart to you, because I can't stop falling in love with you. I'll never to all he brings, risen with healing in his wings. While he lays his glory by, born that man no more may die, but to raise the sons of earth, born to give them second birth. Of the herald is to see you.
Bless you, Lord.
Well, okay. To me it is, anyway. We have a little devotional. And, sometimes it's really difficult to start your quiet time. And I have found, although I have not used this one, I have found out that these little things are really gems. And we just got these in this week. They were supposed to be here a couple of weeks ago, and so it starts in December. So you've missed 4 or 5 days, 4 days. And tomorrow they'll miss 5. And these are in the bookstore. And if you would like to pick one of those up, you might go by and just check it out. It's a nice little, it's $2. And if you can't afford the $2, just take it and tell them that Dan said so. I'll get in trouble later, okay? We want to start a series, Considering Christmas Through the Eyes of Others. Ever thought about that? Considering Christmas through the eyes of others. I'd like for you to turn to Matthew chapter 2. And tonight we want to talk about Christmas from a seeker's perspective. What in the world is a seeker? There are two types of seeker in the world today. Same as there were at the time of the first Christmas. And friends, let me just say this to you. When God comes, there's two types of reactions that people have. They either like it or they don't. And that's exactly what happened at the first Christmas. As a matter of fact, what I love about the Scriptures so much is that human nature never changes. And so what happened back there is exactly what happens today. A lot of people are going, oh my gosh, it is Christmas again. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a little story that happened to me. I was walking across my carport with a big box of Christmas lights. And I was going, I don't like this. You know what I mean? I mean, going through putting up all the lights and all the stuff. And just as clear as I've heard anything, I felt like the Spirit of God just spoke to me and said, you have an attitude. And it's really hard. Well, thank you. It's really hard to deny that when you know that your idea of Christmas and the whole, the commercialization and all the rest of it that comes and all the rest. But sometimes, folks, we can find ourselves in this first category of seekers that are just kind of put off by the whole thing. And as Christians, we are not supposed to, this is the greatest thing that ever happened on the planet. God became a man. God came to the earth. And sometimes we can take on attitudes that just aren't really good. There are those who are satisfied and comfortable with their lives and no real drive or hunger to know more. There are times when this kind of a seeker will rise, and we have noticed this in the church, that lots of times people, when they're just going through a phase in their life, and it might be because things are really going well. As a matter of fact, I've seen this dynamic take place in people's life, that sometimes when they're at the zenith of their life, everything is going well, they will ask the question, what is life all about? And then there's other times when people are just, they're not interested at all in the things of God. They're not interested in church. As a matter of fact, George Barna would say this, and George Barna is a Christian researcher and polls unchurched people. And he will say this, that most seekers, most unchurched people are not put off by God, they're put off by church. So it's like, I don't want to relate to that kind of stuff. I just want to be left alone. My life is busy enough. Don't bug me with God and all this stuff that He came to earth. Just don't have time for it. And then a crisis comes into their life. And believe you me, friends, and let me just say this to you. I'm not wishing this on anybody, but that's just the way that life works. Crisis will come into somebody's life, and then the first thing they'll turn to is God. As a matter of fact, sometimes they'll turn to God when they don't even want to turn to God. When a crisis, they'll cry out, God! And so there's this kind of a seeker out there that is just not interested in church, God, or anything else. And so there's not much you can do about that. But the second type of seeker that we really want to talk about tonight are the Magi. And we want to look at these guys because these guys represent somebody that is always around the idea of wanting to know what is life all about. And there's like this appetite within them that is saying, I've got to know. I've got to figure this thing out. I've got to try and understand why in the world I am not satisfied with life. It just seems like I'm going through the routine every day. There's not much happening in my life, and surely there's more to this than what I'm experiencing. And Jesus comes along. Now, and I'm going to point this out in just a minute, but it's just amazing to me that Jesus can make a statement that just is so general and yet at the same time so specific that it just drills everybody exactly where they are. He makes a statement like this, I am the bread of life. And if you're hungry, now notice this, it doesn't matter what kind of a background you're from, what culture you're from, it doesn't matter what kind of circumstances you find yourself in. Jesus says this, If you're hungry, I'm the one that can satisfy that in you. And I just think that's an audacious statement for anybody to make about anybody in any culture, in any place, saying if you're hungry, if that need in you has never ever been satisfied, I can meet it. And then he comes along and he talks about water. You know, if you're thirsty, you know, and you're not having that life experience that just tells you you're satisfied, wherever you are in life, I am that drink of water, and I can give you water that you will never, ever thirst again. And then really, you know what starts rolling over in my mind? I have to be really honest with you. At times, when I make those kind of statements, I kind of go, ooh, Jesus, I hope you come through. Do you know what I'm saying? Because you're saying to somebody that's out there that's saying, I really want to know. And here's an old used car salesman standing up here and saying to you, and some of you think, well, you're just trying to sell your stuff. You know, but I'm saying to you, it is not based upon what I said. It's based upon somebody that came to this planet that claimed that he was God. Now notice this, and friends, just get a hold of this. You know, sometimes I think we in this culture make Christmas a lot more difficult. We take it from simplicity to complexity. And I think sometimes what really happens with the whole Christmas thing is that people just go, you know, like I was saying earlier, I just don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with all of it. And so they just kind of pull away. And yet at the same time, I can tell you this, is that when I walk through the malls or turn on my radio, and just like coming in tonight, secular station, and they were just playing some of the, like we were listening to tonight, some of the most beautiful Christmas music. And honestly, what's going through my mind, and it doesn't matter where it is, most of the time when I hear that and I'm in a secular, quote, arena, I'm going, thank you. You know why? Because that story still has impact of drawing seekers. God is still doing his work. You know, actually, when these magi come, friends, they come to King Herod. And King Herod this guy is a tyrant. And they know about him. And they come, but it's not him. They didn't come to see a conquering hero. They didn't, you know, it wasn't the upper echelon of society that they came to see. It was something that was simple. A baby. Every weekend somebody brings in a new one in this church, and you know, and ones that we've seen before. And it doesn't matter who you are, you're just attracted to a baby. And if you're not attracted to a baby, there's something wrong. Because you're just looking at something that is so innocent and so pure, and you're just going, I'll just say it to you. I want to be a grandparent so bad it hurts. You know, so if your kid's missing someday, don't just call Pastor Dan. He might have your kid. But they didn't seek after that. What did they seek for? They sought for something that was very, very simple. You see, and through a seeker's eyes, this whole thing gets so complex, and yet it's a really simple message. The biggest one that's ever hit this planet, friends, God became a man. As a matter of fact, if you really want to look at this, God's a seeker himself. He seeks people. And when people are really honest and they want to find who God is, God reveals himself, you see. And then he becomes that hunger. I found something I just wanted to share with you. I'm going to try this on you, and if it doesn't work, then I won't do it tomorrow. So you're just kind of my test, all right? What do we know about these wise men? Well, we know that they were not wise women, because if they would have been wise women, these four things would have happened. They would have asked for directions to the stable immediately. You know, that's one of the biggest fights my wife and I go through. Why don't you stop and ask? And you women just don't know, but we have this intuitive thing in that even though you think we're lost, we really know where we are. Second one is this. They would have arrived on time and helped deliver the baby. You can count on it, friends. I would have never been there for that one. The third thing is this. They would have cleaned the stable and brought something practical for the family to eat, like a casserole. And the last one is this. There would have been peace on earth. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Listen to this. And after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." And when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. And when he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. Now this is interesting here, friends. That here's another type of seeker that is just comfortable and doesn't even get it. Doesn't even understand that this is the time. And these are the people that are supposed to know. Christ was to be born in Bethlehem of Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, and by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make careful search of the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him too." And after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And where they saw the star, they were overjoyed. And coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, of incense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, and let me just tell you something about Herod. Herod is one of the most wicked men in all of history. He had his own mother killed because he was afraid that, this guy was one of the most insecure leaders that you could ever study in history. He had two of his sons killed because he thought they were conspiring. Now, when he's saying this, that he wants to go and worship, he is not wanting to go and worship, and most of us know that. He is wanting to destroy Jesus. You know, there's this crowd that I said really doesn't care, that actually there's a crowd within that crowd that just actually becomes hostile towards the things of God. And Herod is one of these guys. He says, "I want to go worshiping too." Well, that's not true at all. If you have your little outlines, you want to follow along, let's take a look at 5 ways Christmas touches seekers. Number 1 is this. Spiritual awareness is awakened during Christmas. I don't even know why this happens, friends, but it happened at the first one. Listen to this, verse 1. And after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. Now the word Magi, I looked this up this week, could mean magician or magistrate or possibly both. These were individuals who probably practiced, now think about this, the art of magic or illusion. Now in those days it was more magic. I got a little confession to make to you. I really like watching people that practice illusions. I hope that doesn't run anybody out of the church. But you know, and one of the ways I got interested in this, and I'll explain magic here in just a minute. One of the ways I got interested in this, there was a Christian illusionist that came through Grand Junction, and he was traveling actually with Campus Crusade for Christ. And he was showing, friends, he levitated off of the ground 25 feet. It was all this, ooh, and he just go, wow. He sawed people in half just like you see on TV, and then he turns them around and their feet and everything are going, and you're just going, I'm just so impressed. But I was even more impressed with this when he got up and said, the reason I go around and do this is because I want to tell you that any 13-year-old boy in this room could do exactly what I'm doing with 25 years of experience. Do you understand? That it's all an illusion. Now, back in these days, like in Pharaoh, when Pharaoh had magicians around, it was to manipulate and control events. So they were using this kind of illusion and tactics, and maybe there is, and if there really is magic, let me tell you where it comes from. It comes from the demonic realm. And it happens that way. But most of it is illusion, and the way that it happens is that it happens through so that people become controllers, and you can even see that in Pharaoh's, and especially these magi. These were wise people. These were the upper echelon of society. These guys had it going for them. But here's the point. Something about Christmas. Now, this is the first Christmas. They really don't get it. They don't understand. But there's something that's going on in their mind, and they're saying this. All the prominence that I have, all the wealth that I have, all the position that I have, doesn't cut it. There's something going on the inside of them that is saying, what we are practicing is not real. And I just want to say this to you. And I think it's prophetic, friends, that there's many of our friends this year, and probably throughout the years, that are just saying in their own life, and they're not practicing magic or any of those kind of things, but what they are saying is, it just isn't cutting it. And they're not coming to those kind of conclusions on their own. You know how they're coming to that? Spiritual sensitivity. As a matter of fact, let me say this to you. These guys represented more spiritual sensitivity than the people that were in Jerusalem. Seekers have sensitivity to the things of the Spirit. They just don't know what it is. They don't understand what it is, you see. And the Magi are just leaving everything behind. They're going, it's not there. It's not in manipulating people. It's not in controlling people. It's not even in leading people. It's not even having a place of position. There's something else out there. You see? And if you're here tonight and there's something that's going off on the inside of you and just going, you know, life is just kind of like you're describing it there. You are more spiritually sensitive than you would ever recognize, and God is doing something in your life. So people see this, seekers see this, and then they begin to understand that something's beginning to take place in their life. Number 2 is this. They pursue signs that they contemplate are from God. They pursue signs that they contemplate are from God. Verse 2. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Evidently, now I want to just take a minute for you to understand this. There's a guy by the name of Balaam in the Old Testament. And Balaam comes from this area of Persia where these guys are living. And Balaam has prophesied in the Old Testament in Numbers 24:17. It's in your notes. And this is what he says in this prophecy. I see him, but not now. And he's speaking of the Christ. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. Now this story, friends, has been told in folklore religion in their community. And so they know about this story. I wish I had time tonight to talk to you about how that folklore religion really is tied to most tribes around the world. And there's a guy by the name of Don Richardson that wrote a book, Eternity in Their Hearts. And if you ever get a chance to read this book, he says most folklore religions present this kind of a picture. There's a God that is good. There is something that happened with God and this individual, or a bad individual. So you've got good and bad going on. And then you have man in the middle that is trying to find this God that he has lost. And his whole presupposition of this book is that everybody has the same source, basically, of those 3 ideas. And it came from the Tower of Babel. And so when you go in and as a missionary and you begin to research these kind of folklores, usually you can take them right back to creation and then explain to them, this is the God that we are serving. Now, here's the interesting point, is that at some point this story gets to them and they start seeing a star. Now, friends, understand this. These people practice astrology. And let me just say this to you. Anybody that is practicing astrology is really in error because the Bible talks about as being divination. And that is where we start studying the stars. Now that's different than astronomy. I am not talking about astronomy. I am talking about astrology. And lots of times people get hooked into the zodiac. They get hooked into their signs and they will not make a decision without reading that stuff. And friends, let me just tell you something. That is the world of the demonic. Because what you're doing is you're seeking guidance, something that is outside of God's parameters. God is saying, I want you to seek me. Now, What happens in this folklore religion, because the star is coming, they know all about stars, but this one overpowers them. And let me tell you exactly how this works. In the Old Testament, a guy by the name of King Saul was in a lot of trouble. And he went to a witch's house, the witch of Endor, the night before he commits suicide. And actually, he had prohibited all of Israel from practicing this, but he couldn't get any kind of guidance from God. So he goes to this witch's house and he says, call up for me Samuel. And she calls up Samuel, but the real important part of this story is that she is absolutely overwhelmed because he actually shows up. And so God says, oh, you want to practice this stuff? Okay, I'll bring you the real thing. And that becomes, And, she doesn't know what to do with it. And then Saul shakes, and Samuel says, bad idea, Saul, tomorrow you're dead. You don't like the message, but here it comes. Now, that's pretty much what happens with these guys, in my opinion. This star begins to appear, and they're going, could it be? Could this be the one that Balaam actually prophesied about? And I want you to know, these guys are risk takers. Huge risk takers. And so can you imagine some of these, and I'll bring this up in a minute, some of the questions that went on? Where are you going now, honey? Let's say it's a husband and wife relationship. Well, I'm going on a trip. Well, where are you going? I don't know. Well, how do you know where you want to go? Well, this star is going to lead us. You can just imagine the kind of questions that are going on. But now we have this star that is actually overpowering them, and now they're beginning to follow a star. Now, here's the point. Every seeker at some point or another has asked in their own heart, God, give me a sign. Now, let me say something here really carefully. God just doesn't go around practicing signs for your entertainment. But I want you to know that when you are serious and seeking God with all of your heart and saying, God, I really need something from you, God will answer that prayer. Let me give you a story. Got a little time, not much, but Cheryl and I, just before we were getting married, I have a job. And actually, and to show you, friends, I'm not even serving God. I mean, you've heard that testimony, and I'm just away from God. And I can remember as clear as day going to bed one night and just saying, God, I need a better job. If you're there. Amen. This is Dan. Probably wasn't like that, but it's one of those prayers where you just kind of breathe. I woke up the next morning. I could take you out to our house on 444 Manzana. The phone rings. I pick it up. It's a guy on the phone and says, I need you. Could you come to work? And it was like $1 more an hour. And in those days, that was huge. And as a seeker, putting up the phone, it was one of those God moments where this is a sign. I could never get away. There was, I say a quiver in my liver. There was a quiver somewhere in my body because I knew that God had just given me a sign about us going somewhere. And I'm just saying this to you. Seekers, if you're here, God will give you a sign. And if you'll seek God with all of your heart, you'll be found. You'll find Him. Number 3 is this. There's a new motivation to overcome barriers to discover truth. Verse 3, and when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. These men traveled anywhere from 500 to 1,000 miles to come to this place. This trip would have taken probably about 3 months through some pretty hostile environments. It was not an easy thing to do. Their conversations, like I was saying earlier, where are you going? How are you going to get there? There were some major obstacles that they had to overcome to actually get there, but they were willing to pay the price. Now, friends, because we're talking about 2 types of seekers, I want you to think about this kind of a seeker. There is this kind of a seeker that's living 6 miles away in Jerusalem and doesn't even get it that there's a Christmas story that's going on, and they're the ones with all the information. They're the ones that understand that there is a prophecy about a Messiah that's coming, but they don't get it. Now let me let me just track with you on this one for a minute. Because I think really here what the problem is, it's not the issue of miles that separates people. It's the issue of the distance in someone's heart. Because these guys, when they were 500 or 1,000 miles away from Jerusalem, were a lot closer to God in their heart than the people that were in Jerusalem. Now, why is that? I mean, I've had this very statement said to me when I'm sitting in the room, whether it's with Cheryl or family or, staff or anything. You seem like you're a million miles away. What are they saying? You're not present. You're in the room, but you're not here. And friends, this is really what begins to take place when somebody is a seeker, like the second type of seeker that we've been talking about. It doesn't matter what the barriers are. They're going to overcome those barriers because they've got to find out. I was reading a story this week of a guy by the name of Lee Strobel, who was an atheist. And he said, the last thing that I ever wanted to do was to seek God. My wife got saved, he says, some of the roughest times of my whole life. And she came home, and because he was a journalist, he thought, okay, I'll explore this thing. You would be surprised to find out how many mighty men and women of God actually started out their spiritual pilgrimage in a process of trying to disprove Christianity. And that's exactly where this Lee Strobel was. And the more he investigated, the more he found out that maybe this thing is true until finally he fell in. You see? And the point of it was, friends, it took him a long time to overcome a lot of barriers, but he found out that this story that we're talking about, the Christmas story, is something that captivated his heart. And he couldn't turn loose of it until he finally admitted, he is God. This person, Jesus, that came to the planet, which is an absolute mystery, which is a part of the, whatever you want to call it when it comes around to Christianity or to Christmas, that actually intrigues us, is that he is fully God and yet he is fully man, and that is a mystery. Something I have figured out about God. When we get to heaven, there's always going to be this part of God that we will never, ever understand. And one of the reasons why is because if it wasn't a mystery, we would not seek. See? And so there's this, whatever the barriers are, friends, let me tell you something. God will always honor an honest heart. And if you're seeking with an honest heart, I can guarantee you that Jeremiah 29 will become true to you. Jeremiah 29:19, you will seek me and find me when you seek with all your heart. Number 4 is this. Seekers are generous within trustworthy relationships. Boy, this is profound. At least it's profound to me. Seekers are generous within trustworthy relationships. Then they opened, verse 11, then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh. Seekers have a desire to give, but this becomes a huge issue when coming towards the Lord. Now listen to this. When you look at this in context here, first what happens is they find the child, they come to the child, they meet the child. As a matter of fact, the child hasn't even spoken a word, and yet they find the satisfaction that I was talking about earlier about being bread and water. They bow down and they worship. They have found what they are looking for, you see. And then it says, after that, then they opened their treasures. And they gave it. Now, let's just have a little talk here tonight. You know what one of the major problems of unchurched people coming to church actually is? Money. A lot of unchurched people will not enter those doors out there because they're afraid that all the church wants from them is money. And you know what? They're probably right. Because really what happens lots of times is what they see as Christian evangelists or even local churches or whatever, that all they do is hammer the people for money. Cheryl and I have always preached this and always believed it. As a matter of fact, I'll say it to you tonight, is that if you feel any kind of pressure for money, then don't give, and that includes this place. And I've kind of made this deal with God, and I know you're not supposed to make this deal with God, but if finances ever dry up, then it's probably my sign to get out. Because I will not beg people for money. Just will not do it. And then it's amazing to me to find out that when people find God, their heart is unlocked, and then there's absolutely no problem with them giving. They might have to learn a few things, but it is not a huge issue. And we've got it just backwards, friends. People feel pressure to give. And God says, that's not how I want them to come. I want them to come with their heart. I want to touch their heart. And then when their heart is touched, then everything begins to open up. Because they're starting to know who God is. And they want to become more like God. And God is really generous. And so they find out this whole aspect of following God is after coming to know Him. Not to put any kind of pressure on anybody. And believe you me, friends, we talk about finances around here. But if it ever comes to the point where anybody feels in this church that they're being pressured to give, then my suggestion to you is leave. Because it's not God. Amen? Number 5 is this. Are you still with me? As a matter of fact, Christmas brings that whole issue of giving up, doesn't it? Brings it right to the forefront. God doesn't want somebody to give because they have to give. God wants them to give. God loves a what? Cheerful giver. Man, you're quiet. This next point might take a long time. Number 5. Seekers are ready to worship. Verse 11. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped. Worship is an attitude of heart. When we come to express our love to God, it should matter. I want to talk to you about it. These guys, brand new seekers, are going to teach us something about worship. 2 ways we can learn from these guys. Friends, listen to this. Number 1 is this. Watch out for casual worship. Watch it. These guys were not casual worshipers. We may dress casually, but our heart should be ready to worship. Now, here's some casual attitudes that I want you to watch out for. Number 1 could be, I don't like the songs. It's casual worship, casual attitude towards worship. I don't like this style. I just don't feel like worshiping today. Now, I want to take you back to the first. These guys are on cue, so they're coming up here on purpose. I want to tell you about one of the worship services in the Old Testament. This is when God came down on Mount Sinai. And this was a pretty spectacular worship service. God comes down, there's thunder, there's lightning, there's earthquakes, the mountain's shaking, smoke's going up, and all the rest of it. And I would think that most people in that worship service were pretty attentive. Anybody would disagree with that? I think that God probably had their attention. Now, what happens at this? Well, if you're there and our attention is really on worshiping God, it's the same God that came down on Sinai that says He's here tonight. And that worship service really speaks something about the idea of casualness. I doubt if anybody there would have said, that tambourine number of Miriam's just really bugged me and I just didn't feel like worshiping. Can you imagine in the presence of God, somebody having that kind of a statement? Or, here's another good one. Or, I just wish Moses would have led worship tonight and not Aaron. Can you imagine that, Or here's a really good one. This is really kind of eating into my time, God, and I just don't know if I have the time to stay around and worship. See, and these seekers, friends, let me tell you something. When they found Jesus, it was all about worship. And when we have a casual attitude towards worship, we're coming in and saying, God, you're just not meeting my needs. Here's one of the ones that really bugs me, friends. And that's this one. I really didn't get anything out of worship. Like worship is for you. It's not. It's almost like Americans have become Epicureans in worship. I like that one. but I don't like this one. And it has nothing to do with the songs. It has nothing to do with the rhythm. It has nothing to do with the auditorium you're in. It has everything to do with the God that we're worshiping. And he's saying, I want you to worship. As a matter of fact, let me say this to you. You have a need to worship. And when you don't worship, it's not that God gets hurt in the thing, it's that you get hurt in the thing. And this casualness, friends, when we just come into the presence of God, and here's the second point. We've never even thought about preparing ourselves to come into God's presence. They prepared themselves. Seekers. They brought treasures. They thought about this thing. I know I'm getting a little excited. But the point of it is this. What have we done this week to prepare ourselves to meet with God? Has there been confession? God, I was a real jerk. My attitude just stinks. You know, when you convict me about that area of my life and I reacted the wrong way, I'm really sorry. You know, friends, here's something that I think we as Christians really can learn from seekers. They come with expectancy. They come to meet with God. And sometimes what happens to us, in all honesty, we just come to church. Come to church. And God is saying, I come to meet with you. I want to touch you. I want to do something in your life. I think seekers have a whole lot to teach us about what it is to worship God on a whole, fresh, new note. You know, redundancy of anything becomes the familiarity that really separates relationship. I could never say that again in 1,000 years. But I want you to know that's really true. That at some point when we allow redundancy just to bring us to a place, if we're just doing it again, then something is broken in the relationship. So I want you to stand together and we're going to worship the Lord. And I want you to do something real. Come expecting to meet with God. See it from a seeker's perspective this year at Christmas. Let's worship the Lord.
May our streets be filled with joy.
Amen. All I want to say to you is this. Let's be wise people that's still seeking and be that second category of seekers and see Christmas through a new eyes this year. Amen? God bless you. Thanks for coming. Turn around, shake hands. If you need prayer, go over here to the prayer room, all right? God bless you.